Hello, welcome to Afropean Bridges Dialogue 2021. Today we have Chinedu Nwokeafor, Black Lives Matter really active member. And Chinedu, before the talk, I would like you to introduce yourself, so to let our friends and audience understand what you exactly do and what is your role within the movement.
Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Chinedu Nwokeafor. I am an activist, with The World is Watching, BLM, based in Baltimore. And I am an activist and an organizer. I've been doing work in the activism space in Baltimore, Maryland for about 10 years now.
Great. Chinedu, the Black Lives Matter movement has gone global over the last few years. But I'm sure you are aware that there is also a United Nations initiative called the International Decade for People of African Descent. So I was wondering, first of all, how do you relate to the very institutional organizations like the United Nations or the other UN agencies or other international bodies that deal with racism, structural racism, xenophobia? Is there any relationship? And if so, what would you ask to this institutional organization to do for the movement and for the cause?
I think there are a lot of similarities. United Nations being a global body, it serves as an official, official government, if you will, official authority of United Nations, based on the name. The thing about Black Lives Matter is more of the people. Sometimes what happens is when we get into these official organizations, the United Nations, they have ideas, they have initiatives, they have plans, and that's all good and great, but it's executed by the people. So sometimes it's the people that feel that some of their issues aren't being faced as prominently as they need to. And that's what then leads to things like Black Lives Matter, like kind of the people taking their own renegade thing into their own hands. It's more personable. You think about United Nations as such a big name. A lot of people maybe feel like they can't relate, or maybe they're not on such a level to be a representative or represented by that type of body. And there are people who are just experiencing real problems now. And a lot of people feel like they can't wait for the United Nations. So how I look at things is they can also work in tandem. United Nations can push for policy, but when you look at Black Lives Matter, they're more on the ground, on the floor with the people. So I feel like they can work in tandem, but it all depends.
Right. There is this networking, global networking that over the last few years, 2 years maybe, has expanded so much. How do you relate to the other organizations across the pond, so in Europe, that deal with this very same issues? I mean, how is the networking of Black Lives Matter going? Because we here in Europe, we experience pretty similar cases and forms of xenophobia and racism, even though it's different because we have a different history. I mean, in the United States, there's been slavery, but here colonialism has quite strong legacy as well. So how do you relate to the other movements?
I've always looked at it as, when it comes to other European countries or African countries, even Asian countries in the United States, it's like we're all in the same building, but on different floors. So we all come from that. We all are facing that same structural issue, but just in different ways. Throughout the last year or two, I've been, relating with my colleagues because it's good to open up this global dialogue of that this is not an American problem. This is a human problem. This is a worldwide problem of issues, racist, xenophobia, et cetera, et cetera. So with the technology, especially during the pandemic, it has led people to be more technologically inclined, to get on the web and do video chats and conversations. It has led to break down barriers that we're not so much different. We're just in different places, in different spaces, but we're all facing that same ideologies that are perpetuated by white supremacy, et cetera, et cetera. It has led to a better understanding of culture, because sometimes when something happens, it's like, oh, that's an American problem. Oh, that's an Italian problem. Oh, that's a French problem. But it's like, if we're all going through the same things, we should all consolidate our problems and our issues and share and network our solutions, because the same way I have to stand for you is the same way you have to stand for me. It just can't always be in spaces where the media or the nation declares that this is something that we should be upset about. And I'll use an example of, when there's a shooting, when there was a shooting in Nice, France, it was then told, through media and Facebook and all that everybody, we are all friends. But what happens when Black people are discriminated in France? What happens when Black people are discriminated in Italy? There is no coordinated effort to say that, oh, we are all Black, no matter where you are. So this is kind of that moment to build that type of movement of connection. And I feel like with this connection, it pushes our agenda of freedom and peace a lot further.
Right. You mentioned the media, the role of the media. And as far as we can see from Europe, the movement, Black Lives Matter movement, from right-wing politicians and media outlets like Fox News, you've been portrayed as a violent group for years. But still, even though we know that it is actually not true, there are so many people believing that. The people who vote and support politicians like Trump. How do you explain this framing, the effectiveness of this framing?
Well, it just recently got easier simply because of what took place on January 6th. The insurrection, the treasonous acts that those supporters of Donald Trump took at the U.S. Capitol, just based off of them not getting their way. That is an example of how we explain this to the media, because we can now sit two examples together. You have Black people getting killed in the United States. We have never, ever, during any type of protest that were peaceful, it ever led to something of that magnitude. And that is the simple example. It's when you look at white supremacy, when white supremacy owns everything, they own the message and they own how the message is relayed. And that's why social media has become the most powerful and pivotal tool of Black Lives Matter and many people representing that movement, because we now get to tell our own stories. You don't have to wait for CNN. You don't have to wait for Fox. You can see it live on TikTok, live on Instagram, live on Facebook, Twitter, so on and so forth. So you get to make your own judgment. The media can be very helpful, but they can also be very harmful. As somebody who has my first degree is in communications, speech communications with a concentration in rhetoric, it's wording. It's wordings that are so powerful that can make one group seem dangerous and one group seem less dangerous. When a Black person commits a crime, they use scary words of danger, thug, gangster. But then when a young white boy shoots up an Asian a nail salon, they use words like a loner, a downer, having a bad day. So that's the dichotomy in media that we are facing. But what's interesting is it never stopped how the movement is moving, because no matter what people want to believe, there's a saying here in the States, the proof is in the pudding. You can go to any of these events. There has been many protests that I've been a part of that, we're talking about thousands of people with not one fatality. with not one issue. The media just chooses to portray what they're portraying because in this day and age, it's not about who gets the story right. It's who can sell the best story and who can get it first. And when you look at the idea of what you can monetize off of media, it now leads to saying, if this group of people are picking up this story better, let's post it this way, let's say it that way, which is not journalism, but that's the business of the world that we live in. But it's also about white supremacy. It's this idea that people that are non-whites, Black and brown people, it's the idea that they're dangerous. And that is to uphold those same ideas that existed during Jim Crow, to uphold those same ideas that existed during the transatlantic slave trade, that people who are Black or of African descent are inhumane, they are less than. And whether the media thinks that they're not doing it as dangerously as it once was, they're perpetuating it by using wordings, by using journalism, because some people get all their information from the news. So those words, if you're living in rural Minnesota in the United States, and you've never seen a Black person in your life, but you watch TV and the TV describes a Black person as dangerous, and now you live in metropolitan Atlanta, you will now view Blacks as dangerous. It's a very important, thing that the media should do by taking a better look at what's actually going on and report facts and not just trying to sell for the public.
What would you say would be the actual expectations with this different administration, not just for Black and brown people in the United States, but on a more global level, because there seems to be some kind of convergence also with the EU, with the current European Commission addressing those very issues like populism, nationalism, and white supremacy. What do you expect from the Biden administration?
Well, I expect for the Biden administration at least a level of transparency. I will always tell people, no matter what administration is in office, it's up to the people. It's always going to be up to the people to get the type of results that they want. It will always be up to the people. The administrations just can make it easier or more difficult. I think with Joe Biden as president, and more importantly, Kamala Harris as VP, I think it is a bold statement of showing that not only is America back, but America is ready to take the mantle of the leader that we once were viewed as. And that's very, very important, because a lot of people are looking to us. So when you look at how Biden has built his administration, he is setting that stage of equality and equity, not only by choosing the first female, vice president, who's now, Kamala Harris, but by his cabinet, where you see a lot of women, where you see people of LGBTQ, you see people of Asian descendants, you see people of, African American descendants, and so on and so forth. His cabinet is starting to look like the people he wants to lead. And that's a very important statement, because in my school, we had this belief of what they see is what they'll be. And you can't go to the world and say that we need to come together and stop, racism and bigotry, et cetera, if the administration that you're leading with doesn't look like the many people who are facing those issues that you're trying to solve. So I think with Joe Biden as president and Kamala as VP, we're on to a greater start, a better chance for this international cooperation on not only just economics, but human rights. But like I said previously, it's not just about them. The people have to take advantage of this time and push forward, push their agendas, push their missions. At the end of the day, it's coming down to people wanting to be verified and viewed as human beings. That's all Black and brown people have been asking for. And now that we have a great administration in the office that has representation of us, we have a better fighting chance compared to our last administration, where it was a vast majority of white men, white rich men, who do not understand the plight of different people, different nationalities. And because they're rich white men, they don't care, or they didn't care about certain issues that they were not privy to based off of lifestyle. So I think, we're building back better, as Biden says. We're in a better position to face the world and to face ourselves, because that's the very important part that people miss. In order to lead, one has to look within self. America has put a mirror to herself now, and she's seen what she has done. And it's about time that she addresses it, acknowledges it, and does something better. And that in itself will become pattern to our European brothers and sisters, to our Asian brothers and sisters, to all other different countries who look to us for leadership.
We mentioned the role of the media, and now you mentioned school, the role of education. I know you've been very active. You're still very active in the field of education. How much does education matter for your cause, for the struggle?
Education is by far the most important part of this movement, and it's underscored sometimes because a lot of times in these movements, people don't want to be too associated with the hoi polloi of the upper echelon, because the common man feels like he might be, disassociated from somebody in the educational field, somebody very erudite, and so on and so forth. But I always tell people education is so important because it expands your issue. It expands what you know. This movement is in conjunction. And I always tell people, I was in school as well as leading protests and leading movements. It was school that helped me learn that this issue isn't new, and the importance of how to actually make legislative and legal changes in the future. And I think that's where the education comes in. It's not just about going on the street and getting people to follow you. It's actually a process. And it's very, very important that we use education as a great tool, because some of our greatest activists and leaders were very highly educated. But I also think it's important that we delineate that the idea of, again, what I would like to call upper echelonism, where it's now that you're educated, it's like you post out your chest and you're better than, and people who are not educated are less than. It's not how it works. I think it has to work in tandem, and you have to be one with the people. So when it comes to education and learning about activism and human rights and so on and so forth, I always tell people, as you get that education, it's very, very pertinent that you stay with them. When I did my activism in Baltimore, it was very important that as I was going to school every day, that I still was going to the streets, going to activities and events to make sure that I don't lose the people that I'm trying to serve. Very, very important. You can't use education as an escape. Education should be a tool, a bridge, a conduit for the solution. So I think it's very, very important to put more emphasis on education. And I hope that at some point that at institutions of higher learning, we could create institutes of peace within those institutions where we discuss about the importance of civil disobedience and human rights and so on and so forth. Because you think about it, the world needs doctors and lawyers. So universities specialize in medical and law. The world also needs great activists. There's no course called activism. There's no major called activism. So in spaces like that, that's where it's important to build, semi-institutes in there where we can build tomorrow's leaders, because this is a skill that so many people need, and education will not solve it alone. And that's where you need the social aspect to come together, to stew, if you will, for the solution of peace and prosperity.
Yeah, human rights defenders, these activists that you were talking about, are are being targeted as well from by white supremacists or racist groups or far-right politicians. So human rights defenders, it is an issue per se. One last thing about Africa. One of the key issues within the Afropean Bridges events and talks is the representation of Africa and of African people, especially immigrants to Europe nowadays. We saw and we see still today that the representation of Africa matters so much in terms of how globally you perceive Black and brown people. So there is this kind of, stereotyping going on, not just within the media, but in the public sphere on a global level. What is your relation to the movements? I mean, with Africa and with so many different conflicts and struggles that they experience there, and how do you think that an alternative, another representation, a better representation of African people could help not just the movement, but the actual condition of African descendants and African immigrants?
Africa is a very complex situation because Africa shares a story that is similar to many other countries, but it's similar to many other continents and countries and so on and so forth, as in countries within Africa. Very similar stories, but it's also very unique. It's a one-of-a-kind situation. First and foremost, I think when we think about Europe and America, to make amends for all the wrongs that they did, all the problems of Africa, it's a two-part thing. All the problems of Africa, in my opinion, were initiated by colonizers. Okay. Granted now, secondary, a lot of the people, we talk about some of these presidents who've been president for 20, 30 years, not allowing elections, annulling elections. When I think about that, it makes me laugh. And I say that we have to be before we talk about Africa, let's be very, very clear that the things that Africa has done that people like to view or the media likes to view negatively, they learned it from somewhere. America is a very old democracy, and you had a president who wanted to annul elections because he didn't get his way. That happens in Africa all the time. And when it happens, people in the States say like, oh, that's barbaric. But do you not see the similarities? Or in 2000 and how the election was, stolen from Al Gore when George Bush with the counting of electoral votes in Florida. I say that to say that Africa, just like Black people, they're just portrayed to be a land of nothingness. People keep assuming that it's just a wasteland, it's barbaric, it's this, but then we go there for gold, oil, coltan, and so on and so forth, that we need to develop our countries. So I think Africa's biggest issue is their own self-efficacy. It's time that Africa tells its own stories and not worry about how people view it. Tell your own stories and be proud of what you are, who you are, and how you're moving and how you're growing. There's so much development in Africa. There's huge tech in Africa. There's huge business industries. There's economic engines being formed out of nothingness. I mean, Africa is the greatest story never told. And I think when you look at the hatred that a lot of European and American nations have had, or probably still do have for Africans, it makes no difference. It's no surprise why they view immigrants in such a condescending way. You go to these countries, you colonize them, and you create deplorable conditions for people who were autonomously running their lives in the way that they saw fit. And now these people want to escape and come and find refuge. And you're telling them, no, you can't be the problem and then deny the solution as well. And that just comes from a hatred, this idea that white men believe that Africans, Black people, are to be controlled, that we're disposable and dispensable. And that is where I say it is up to Africa to fix her problems, look to herself to solve her issues, because you keep leaning on these people who colonized you to help you. They'll only help you but so much. But that will come from great leadership. That will come from the youth coming together. You see in Nigeria, you have the youth that came together with the NSARS movement of police brutality. Now you have these African countries where people look the same, now having ethnic issues. And I always tell people these ethnic issues, a lot of them are because white supremacy, these people came and they draw lines and they amalgamated different tribes without understanding the differences. I find it very interesting that in Europe, you can have United Kingdom, where it's a land of so many different countries that have their own culture, their own rules, their own representation, but still are enshrined together as, one giant collective, but with their own autonomy. But then you came to Africa and you put all these ethnic groups together and say you all must be one without having that autonomy, there's very much danger. Africa is raveling at its seams because of that central issue of joining people that may look the same, but may worship different, think different, act different, and are different. So there's so many different issues that are taking place in Africa, but no issue is greater than Africa taking up the mantle and saying, I will do best for myself, no matter what that means. But I will take control from myself. I will keep my languages. I will keep my own currency. I will not deposit my currency in the French banks and so on and so forth to help them grow on already growing economy. But then we're suffering here in penury. Africa has to look at herself and say, I no longer want to make excuses that I want to be the captain of my own ship. But it should be clear that these problems were propagated by the idea of white supremacy and control. And that's what we see worldwide. But Africa has a very bright future. I see very big growth for African people. As an African person, I've seen my country, Nigeria, change within the last 10 years, and I haven't even been. With technology, with business, with commerce. It doesn't matter if the world knows about it. We know, and we're proud. That's what matters the most. The world will come, but we're proud, and being proud, but not just only sitting in that pride, doing the work for the people as well.
You say quite interesting, my country, Nigeria. Mm-hmm. How, if I may ask, how do you live your belonging both to America and Nigeria?
I always tell people America is where I was born. Nigeria is what's within. I'm here, but my parents, who immigrated from Nigeria in the 80s, they raised me and my other 3 siblings, it's 4 of us in total. They raised us to understand where we're from and to never forget it, not only by giving us Nigerian names, but teaching us the language and then taking us home. And it's not till I got to college that I realized that I think my parents did something deeper than they knew, because when you think of the transatlantic slave trade, the first thing they took away from you was your name and your identity. And, being born in America, of course, identity is one thing that so many people are trying to take from you, or so many people are trying to not qualify. But my parents really raised me to understand where I'm from. So I've always been a representative of Nigerians and Africans, as well as Americans. One is not more important than the other, but one did come before the other.
Chinedu, thank you very much. We're really looking forward to having you in Venice, hopefully next year once the pandemic will be eventually over. And thank you very much for your commitment and what you do.
And I thank you very much for the opportunity. And I look forward to coming to Venice. And I look forward to continuing the dialogue.
Absolutely. Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye.